G'day and welcome to Follow the Money, the Australia Institute's podcast demystifying the big economic issues in Australia and putting them in plain English. I'm Ebony Bennett, Deputy Director at the Institute, and today we're bringing you some special guests from our Economics of a Pandemic webinar series. Green Senator Sarah Hanson Young, author and playwright Melanie Tait, and our Chief Economist Richard Dennis, who joined a discussion on the role of the arts and artists in the economy, because the Australian arts industry was one of the earliest economic casualties of COVID-19, as museums, theatres, galleries, festivals and music venues shut down to avoid a public health crisis, leading to massive job losses, even as more than ever we're relying on TV, music and books to help us cope with isolation.
Here's a song for the artist and the freelancer too, those who can't take the day off if they get the flu.
I'm Julia Zamiro, I'm a TV presenter and festival director. Every artist, festival, gallery, theatre, live music venue has lost their audiences and income. That's 50,000 artists, 600,000 workers, all mostly casual.
We're all in isolation right now, which means audiences don't get to attend and companies like ours have lost all our income.
And like many Aussie artists during this crisis, I've lost most of my annual income due to cancelled events.
Can I say, while some people want to think of this sector as celebrities, they are workers.
The creative sector is huge. We are looking at bigger than mining, 6 times the size of the aviation industry. So far, we fall short of the stimulus package, and we are relying on it to get through this crisis. A specialist package is needed.
The arts sector is going to be so important in providing inspiration to Australians as we come out of this.
The government stimulus package hasn't been very stimulating.
Still some structural issues there because that industry has literally just disappeared.
So we need MPs to ensure artists are included. Post using the hashtag Create Australia's Future, and washing our hands will help us survive, but protecting the arts, that will help us live.
Sarah, I'm going to throw to you first. So last week you were back in Parliament, so to speak, with the job package. What were you trying to do yourself as part of extending that JobKeeper package to the arts? What's the problem there?
Well, as you said, Eb, and firstly, let me just say thank you to the Australia Institute for organising this. I think this is a fantastic forum, and it's so wonderful to see so many people engaged and wanting to participate and learn about what's really going on in this space, because it is devastating, actually. And as you said at the beginning, the moment those first lots of restrictions started coming out, in relation to our response to COVID-19, it was the arts and the entertainment space that was smashed instantly, literally overnight, from gigs being organised to events being closed, cancelled, pubs closing their doors, and of course a whole season of activities that was going to be running between March and right through to July, August, were seemingly just wiped off the calendar. We know studio productions have been cancelled. So across the board, it's been very, very difficult for the industry. And despite that, we still haven't seen an industry-specific package. It was one of the first. It obviously dovetails a lot into the hospitality industry and also the tourism industry because of the how closely they all work together. And so it's not just the arts and entertainment. The flow-on effect has been for even more workers beyond that. And so when we got to Parliament last week and the government was finally debating and discussing the wages guarantee, the subsidy, the JobKeeper package, we wanted to make sure that the arts and entertainment space were going to be looked after. Sadly, that hasn't happened. And the reason it hasn't happened is because the way this industry works means that people rely a lot on kind of contract by contract, gig to gig engagement with employers. So a lot of people miss out because of that requirement that casuals had to be with the same employer for 12 months. And then there's also a whole lot of issues in relation to freelancers and sole traders that just are not captured by these rules the way they are. So, you know, for example, if you were somebody that was working on the Byron Bay Blues Festival, you may have been working on that for the last 5 or 6 years, and so you'd be employed through a company in relation to that 5 or 6 times, but you're not employed by them for 12 months, and so therefore you're not eligible. Of course, a lot of the other ways that these projects are set up, if you're in a studio, you're filming a production, often there is a company that is effectively set up just for that project. And because of that, you can't compare your income month to month or from March this year to March last year. So it really, the government missed the understanding of how this sector operates notionally. And as a result, we still have hundreds of thousands of people out of work with very little prospect of what's going to happen next. However, let me be really clear, we are all consuming more content, art and entertainment than ever before. And I think this is where the opportunity comes for making sure we invest in a sector that is helping us through this crisis, keeping us all sane, but also will be one of the first we reach to as we start the recovery, because there's going to be a lot of conversations about how we got through this, how we worked through this as a community, what this meant to us, how this impacts on our national identity, where Australia fits in the rest of the world now. Art and entertainment is how we make sense of those things. So it's absolutely essential, not to mention, of course, the economics.
Thanks, Sarah. And I think it'd be great to go to you now, Mel, as an artist who had an upcoming show, a broadcast coup that was really in its final stages. How has this impacted you personally?
Thanks very much for having me, Ebony, and to the Australia Institute for doing this. So my show, A Broadcast Coup, which was a brand new Australian play, was 4 days into rehearsal when we got the news that we wouldn't be putting on the show. So what that involves is, like I said, 4 days into rehearsal, we had the production coming up a little bit later. We would have actually opened this week, so we were shut down around March the 16th. And we would have opened this week or next week. You know how time has just become completely irrelevant the last few days. So we had a 6-week run at the Ensemble Theatre in Sydney, and then we were going to transfer to the Canberra Theatre, the Playhouse there. So it was it was a fairly big production. I counted that we had 13 people immediately involved in that production that are now out of work. But as well as that, I had another production also about to start rehearsal pretty much around now, a professional production of my play, The Appleton Ladies Potato Race in Tasmania, with Tasmanian theatre company Blue Cow Theatre. So that's also a bunch of Tasmanian artists that now won't be in work for the next couple of months too.
And so, like Sarah was saying, people don't get hired to do that Appleton Ladies Potato Race for a 12-month contract, is it?
No, they don't. And it's not just the actors that are involved. The actors are obviously a very, very important part of this, and both of those shows have 5 actors each. But there's a whole team of people who are employed as freelance creatives to contribute to the play. So, for example, with A Broadcast Coup, and I'm so sorry to anyone who I might have forgotten, but I don't think that I have, we've got a director, we've got an assistant director, we've got a set designer, we've got a sound designer, we've got a lighting designer, we've got a costume designer, we've got a costume supervisor, we've got a stage manager, we've possibly got an assistant stage manager as well. So there's lots of people that are involved, and that's not mentioning the theatre itself and box office and bar, etc., who are really gravely affected by this pandemic and these changes that have been made.
Thanks, Mel. We might come back to you in a little while, but I mean, that's a microcosm for 2 plays, essentially. But Richard, if I can throw to you now, what role does the arts industry play within the Australian economy?
Look, the arts industry is a very big employer that plays an important role, not just in the economy as a way of creating jobs, as a way of distributing income, as a way of earning export revenue, but obviously, you know, the arts industry is greater than the sum of its parts. It's the way that we understand ourselves, each other. It's the stories we tell. There's 193,000 people employed in the creative arts in Australia. To put that into perspective, there's less than 50,000 people work in coal mining. So, we've all heard these stories about how some industries are the backbone of the nation and they hold the economy aloft. Well, they're nonsense stories, and they're, ironically, the creative arts are probably worse at telling stories about themselves than the coal mine owners. So, yeah, less than 50,000 people employed to make coal, nearly 200,000 people employed directly in the creative arts. That's more people than work in the finance sector. It's a big employer. It plays a big role in our economy. And, unfortunately, the Australian public debate just sort of doesn't take that into account. Or we say things like, but they're not real jobs. It's people that dig things or make things, that they're the real jobs. Well, as an economist, I don't know what that means. There are whole economies like Singapore or Japan that haven't got a single coal mine in them. Do we think there aren't any real jobs in Singapore or Japan? It's meaningless. It's an Australian story about a very small part of our economy, and then we kind of miss the actual the big employers that do a lot of storytelling. And just finally, in terms of this crisis, a friend of mine who's very active in the entertainment industry, when I rang him up early in the crisis to say, how's it going? He said, well, put it this way, Richard, I'm in the business of putting on non-discretionary events for more than 500 people. His whole business is, you couldn't invent a worse business to get hit by this. The large parts of the arts and entertainment industry were not just, as Sarah said, the first hit, they'll be the last to come out. So for all sorts of reasons, not just cultural importance and economic significance, but just if we look at how this virus is hitting our economy, what's the first thing it hit? Large discretionary events for more than 500 people. What's the last thing we're going to put on? Probably large discretionary events for more than 500 people. So, yeah, I think there are lots of good reasons, economic, cultural and equity, for why we need to take supporting the arts more seriously than we have.
Sarah, I'll come back to you in just a tick, but just a reminder for everyone who's on with us now, and I can see we've got people from Susan in Adelaide to someone from Hobart, Craig from Hobart right at the beginning. So we've got people from all over Australia. Thanks for joining us. If you do have a question for any of our panellists, if you'd like to raise it in person, there's a raise your hand function and I'll call on you a little bit later. But also we've got a Q&A function. So you can type in a question and we'll see it and ask it of the panellists a little bit later. And you can upvote questions that you think should be answered. So a couple of you should find those by hovering over the menu at the bottom of the screen here. Sarah, Richard was talking just then, I guess, about the overall role in the economy and comparing it to other sectors of the economy, but we are seeing, bailouts for airlines and other things. Is there a recognition in Parliament of that there needs to be something happen for the arts industry, or it's more or less been ignored? What's your sense there?
Look, I think up until now it's been sadly, while the minister is Paul Fletcher, Minister for Communications and Arts, and he's been listening to the sector, but I'm not sure he's really heard what the sector actually need. I've actually got a meeting with him tomorrow, so I'm looking forward to putting some of these issues directly to him again. But look, there's been some responses. There's been some a small amount of money go to Support Act, which is a charity that helps musicians, in particularly those doing live performance, to try and help them put food on the table. It's very kind of basic type of charity, but that's not enough to keep a whole industry alive. There's been nothing at this point for the kind of broader art sector. Look, we really need a sector-specific rescue package, and like Richard has said, the coming out of this COVID-19 crisis, we're going to need stimulus in this area, but also the advantage of investing, I believe, through a rescue package that would also be a recovery package, would be to create jobs and get that money sloshing around in the economy very quickly if you were to fund an Australian content fund so that those who make screen productions could access it, a package of money for live performance so that people can be supported for planning what happens after those non-discretionary events, as Richard calls them, could be put back on. Authors, of course, need to make sure they're not forgotten in all of this. The Minister today has just, literally in the last 45 minutes, announced a massive change to the rules of broadcasters in Australia and the amount of locally made content that those broadcasters have to show. That's going to be very, very bad news for all those in TV production, screen production in Australia. Unless we put more money on the table, unless there is an Australian content fund, I really fear now that we're going to see massive job losses in the screen industry.
Mel, did you want to say anything else about how this is impacting on, I guess, artists as individuals as compared to kind of the sector overall?
Yeah, I would. We did a straw poll this morning with the people that were directly involved in our company. And this is probably just a small, like you said, a microcosm of the larger picture about what kind of work has been lost and how many jobs have been lost. So in our team of, like I said, around 13 people, the director of the show, Priscilla Jackman, sent out a text this morning, and we heard back probably from about 6 or 7 of those artists. And just in that team of 6 or 7 artists, there are 58 confirmed contracted gigs that have been lost for just the rest of this year. And that's not including teaching, it's not including workshopping plays, etc. They're sort of actual performances. But I would just like to go back to something that Sarah said. And I feel like one thing that's really missing from this conversation about where the funding goes and what the funding does is talking to individual artists about their wants and needs. For example, when this all first happened, one of the funding bodies approached me very generously, but they had been given a clump of money basically for performances that had been cancelled to film them somehow. Now, keeping in mind that you can't get people in the same room at the moment. I mean, you can Zoom it, you can do all that kind of stuff, but you can't get people in the same room. And with something like theatre, I mean, as delightful as these Zoom readings are and the like, theatre really relies on the connection, face-to-face connection of actors on stage, and then the connection between an audience and what's going on stage as well. So to throw money at filming something that has just been shut down, it kind of feels like it's misdirected to me, and that it was very much probably, you know, that there was an arts minister somewhere who meant well with that, but actually didn't do the consulting, didn't talk with the artists themselves. So that would be the extra thing that I would want to bring into this mix, is talking with individual artists, not just companies as well, but individual artists to talk about what it is that they need.
I've got now Matt Diener from Screen Producers Australia. Matt, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah. What did you want to say or ask of the panellists today, Matt?
Oh, look, I think this is a really important conversation. And the things that we have picked up is that Sarah's right, in that there seems to be a lot of understanding about the actual nature of what a project-based, short-term, frames around doing work in our industry. And what we're seeing is, at the moment, an attempt to mitigate the risks associated with, for us, it's the platforms that we sell to, being the broadcasters, in the announcement that's just come out. So there's a huge problem that Sarah identified just then that's literally just come through as a press release, that the quotas that the industry depends upon to have commissioning requirements across children's content, documentary content, drama content that employs a lot of people and then spreads that money into lots of other parts of the sector and keeps a lot of creative industry people in and out of the screen industry engaged with. That's been suspended till the end of this year as a way of giving the broadcasters relief on their content quotas. Now, our problem with that is that it sends a signal that straight to the industry that, you know, their dreams and their opportunities for coming out of this, at least for a big chunk of the industry, being snuffed out because there is no requirement on the broadcast to then do this. And at the same time, there's the release of an options paper, which, you know, the worst case scenario would be that this is a pause of these content obligations that then never gets unpaused because you've got an options paper that's ready to go that is maybe, well, we haven't read it yet because it's literally been just released, but suggesting that they never get returned. So, you know, this is somehow, and I don't know why you'd go down this path because of the problems and the machinations of larger businesses saying that they're in trouble, and there's no issue to suggest that the advertising industry is damaging the likelihood of a quick recovery for many of our commercial broadcasters. But that has a spin-off into, you know, all of the creative industries, certainly our industry, and no sign yet from government that it's really thinking about that part of the system, our part of the system, and the thousands of people we employ and the kind of work that we do and the cultural narrative that I think people are relying on in their day-to-day as to how they feel connected to this nation. So we're thoroughly disappointed really with what's just happened, and it seems to be, you know, a continuation of a theme, right? We haven't seen messaging to say that the industry is valuable. We haven't seen a kind of a signal that a package of assistance that's tailored to the sector will be done. And now we're seeing, in our case, a kind of a snuffing out of the lights of optimism and hope at this moment for many people. It's devastating.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. Richard, I guess that brings up to me that idea of contrasting the arts with other industries that the government or governments seem to care more about, or like the mining industry. We hear a lot about mining jobs, but there's also been a lot of insecure workers left out of the JobKeeper package. Is this partially about how we view work and what type of work we value?
Oh, absolutely. You know, again, how ironic that the industry that are there to tell Australian stories, you know, their story is being overlooked here. We have a very traditional version in Australia of what real jobs are. As I said, coal mining or making cars, that's proper. And all these people working over here in arts and entertainment, somehow, both politically and from an economic point of view, we talk as if they're less important. And similarly, you know, this announcement, we've literally only heard it half an hour ago, but the idea that what we're going to do is we're going to help the broadcasters at the top of the supply chain. So the people who broadcast content, we're going to reduce the restriction on them, reduce the obligation on them to literally buy Australian content in order to improve the business circumstances of the broadcaster at the top. But what we've actually done in the middle of a crisis is actually load up more pain and load up more costs on all the people that make that Australian content. Now, you know, again, literally just had a quick look at it before this webinar started, but how absurd. I mean, if anything, you'd think at the moment we would be increasing the obligation on Australian broadcasters to produce more Australian content. Why not place obligations on streaming services like Netflix, for example, who now make a lot of money in Australia? Why not say 20% of the money they collect from us in our subscription fees has to be spent on Australian content? You know, let's not forget we're one of the richest countries in the world. It's a privilege to have a broadcasting license in Australia. It's a very profitable opportunity for streaming services to come here and sell access to content. When we sold broadcast licenses, those broadcast licenses were bought by people who then had an obligation to provide news, an obligation to provide local news, an obligation to provide Australian content. And after they've bought these licenses, one by one, we're removing or reducing the obligations that came with those licenses. So, yeah, I think rather than cutting the obligation to make Australian content, now would be the perfect time to increase it and for the first time to impose it on the big new streaming services that are making so much money out of Australia.
Thanks, Richard. Evelyn Richardson from Live Performance Australia, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for joining us. Did you have a question or a comment?
Oh, look, I just following on from what Matthew has said and obviously Sarah and the other speakers. I mean, from the live performance perspective, I mean, effectively we've seen our industry collapse. So it's not just a matter of waiting for a collapse. I mean, everybody is well aware of all the tens of thousands of people that have lost their jobs, but at the same time, we've also seen all of our companies having to significantly downsize. We've got huge cash flow problems, both in the subsidised sector but also in the commercial sector, because for our industry, we're looking at a 12-month. That's not my dog. We're looking at a 6 to 12 month, time frame in terms of anything being reactivated. And we've got the Chief Medical Officer already flagging that music festivals, for example, won't be, coming anytime soon. And so when we're looking at general macro economy measures that can help some sectors for a 6-month period, they're not really that useful for ours, because we're looking at least 12 months before we might see reactivation, and probably 18 months, 2 years before we see a full resumption of, activity that we might have seen, 4 weeks ago, because we're going to have border issues with respect to international artists coming in, and also what we can export and take out. So all of these are going to be significant barriers to how we're going to operate. The lack of a targeted package in the industry right now is pretty significant in terms of how many of those companies, we've got 500 performing arts companies across the country and all our commercial producers and music promoters who are going to have to try and ride this out. Most of them won't be able to do that. And at the same time, without those targeted measures, I mean, we are starting to scope a recovery plan, but for our recovery, we're looking out 2 years, and the industry, we will not look the same on the other side. We're going to see significant structural change, and what we look at in terms of our arts and entertainment sector that we've taken for granted for the last 50, 100 years, we won't look the same in 12 months, 18 months time, and that's even with government support, which we urgently need. But the impact of this is just so significant, and without a plan or a time frame from government at this point in time, because they can't give us one, then it's really going to be a question of what we can do over in those sort of 6-month blocks to get through to the other side, and then restructure our industry so that we can move forward.
Yeah, thanks, Evelyn. I'm going to go to one more person that I know is here from within the industry, and then we might start going to some other guests for your questions. And I can see we've got a number of questions in the Q&A there, so thank you very much, everyone. Do I have Bethwyn there from the Australian Major Performing Arts Group?
Yes, hi, Ebony, and thank you for this initiative. It's great to hear from everyone, and from Evelyn and Matt. So with the major performing arts companies, they've also been doing very scenario planning, and they've got solvency issues and issues with several of their contractors, as Melanie was saying, falling through the cracks and not getting support. And sometimes these are people that are working with the companies over 6, 10, 20 years, but they come in for specific gigs each year. That can be even musicians at the Brandenburg Orchestra and so on. We've just seen an email out today that all of the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra musicians have been stood down. Some of those, fortunately, do get JobKeeper, but I think that's what's really important is this is a sector that's way ahead of the curve in sort of the gig economy, and it's where the rest of the economy was supposedly going. And it shows a real lack of understanding that we are small business. But yet when we hear the conversations about small business, we don't fit. We are the gig economy. We are nimble. And yet somehow that's become a liability. And I couldn't agree more with what Evelyn was saying, that this rebuild is not simply about going and putting our costumes and dusting the stage and getting back there. There's a lot of rebuilding that needs to happen. And we also have to worry about the suppliers. So even in the subsidised sector, we're still hiring lights and sets and building and construction. It's a whole ecology. But we're also engaged. I was talking with some of the community arts people yesterday. It's a sector that works from the smallest individual regional town with a small museum and volunteers with some writing and reading that might go on and be shared to some of our largest major musicals as LPA will represent, or the opera and so on. And the value is the two things that we're talking about, the social value and the economic value. And somehow we can't wedge those two things against each other. We're the full package.
Yeah, thank you, Bethwyn. I think that's a really good point. Melanie and Richard, I might go to you on that. Melanie, you've been a freelancer, I'm sure, for many years of your life. Do you feel like there's any understanding whatsoever of the nature of the work and why that's proving so hard for the government to capture and include in its income support systems?
I'm not sure that the government do have a proper understanding of what it takes to be a freelancer. I mean, Bethwyn made a really great point there that as freelancers, and I have to point out I'm one of the lucky people at the moment that I'm not a freelancer at this time. I've actually got a job in media, which I'm really very grateful for. But like you said, have spent quite a while as a freelancer before. Freelancers are small business people, and for want of a better word, we're kind of hustlers as well. We are always looking for work and looking ahead at where the next work can come from, and the complete vacuum of that is really, really frightening for people. One of the things that I think a lot of the arts discussion will be around, quite rightly so, is keeping the companies alive and keeping the companies alive so that the artists have somewhere to create when this is all over, whenever it is all over, however it is that happens. And I think that in this discussion, we need to also be remembering the engine room of these companies, which is the artists who are contracted for short amounts of time over time, and who are the people that you see on the posters and the people that are coming up with the creative vision for the works that the companies then put on. So I would hope that, again, this comes back to consultation with government. I mean, I don't know what the government thinks arts workers do. I know that from my non-arts worker family and friends, to me, they don't understand what it is that we do. I think they think we just do something fun with our spare time that we're lucky to be paid for if we get paid for, which, of course, as highly skilled professionals, we all know that that's not the case. And I only hope that the government go into conversation and start taking this really seriously and start looking at these sole traders and freelancers, like Bethwyn said, as small businesses, because basically that's what we all are.
Richard, I'll go to you, and then Sarah, I think the first questions are probably more for you, so we'll come to you after this. But Richard, broadly speaking, I think you're muted at the moment. Insecure work and that idea of freelancers, is that just something that we're going to have to revisit, that this whole crisis has really exposed the fragility of how we've built a huge part of our workforce?
Absolutely. Are you hearing me all right? I don't think I'll...
That's good.
Yeah, look, basically, as every politician has loved to brag about for decades, it's 29 years since Australia had a recession. And unfortunately, this idea of the gig economy kind of being a stable, secure place to work if you were good enough, has evolved in a period where we haven't had a recession for 29 years. So, of course, the gig economy works very well for many people, but not having sick pay, not having holiday pay, not having legal connections to an employer in a time like this is a very vulnerable place, and a lot of people have found themselves in that. Something really simple and important that I should stress is I really think that anyone who is in this industry really should contact either their accountant or an accountant quite quickly to find out what you are eligible for. There is quite a lot of change going on, and a lot of freelancers, for example, might fall between the cracks. Freelancer doesn't necessarily mean casual. A lot of freelancers have short-term, full-time contracts, and freelancers really need to understand the rules for what has been announced. But big picture, everybody should understand as much as they can about how JobKeeper works, and there's going to be big differences as to whether you're a casual or whether you're a freelancer. Categories that you might not have thought too hard about as an individual, but the way the rules are being decided, those categories are going to make a really big difference. But yeah, unfortunately, the ABS data, the Australian Bureau of Statistics data, makes clear that of all the industries in Australia, firms operating in arts and entertainment have shut down faster than any other industry in Australia. Less than half of the companies that were operating in January weren't operating in March. That's the biggest impact of any industry in Australia, and the proportion of people working in that industry that are part-time, casual, freelance, again, the different things, the proportion is very, very high. So, and really, yes, in the long run, I think we need to try and unscramble that omelette, but in the short run, it really is important that people look in to the specifics of what's available, because those edges of those categories are going to make a lot of difference to how much money some people get and some people miss out on.
Ebony?
Yeah.
Can I just add something to what Richard was saying about information seeking? Yesterday, Ainslie and Gorman Arts Centre in the ACT, and this might be worthwhile information for any artists who are watching now, did a really great explainer with an arts lawyer about how you can negotiate Centrelink and where you fit on that spectrum, and it's really worth checking out. It's on their Facebook page, and it's Ainslie and Gorman Arts Centre in the ACT.
Thank you. If you can send that to me, we might send it around after this along with the video recording. So Sarah, Kelly Wood and who's the other person? Tom Smith, both asked similar questions, I think. One about why do you think the federal government hasn't given targeted assistance to the arts industry when it's one of the hardest hit? And Tom also asks, what are the kinds of conversations on the arts in Canberra that you hear? What opinions are expressed, and how many eye rolls do you see when arts funding is mentioned?
Both really good questions. Let me first say I'm not surprised we're having this conversation given the pathway that the arts were starting to take under this government. You've got to remember that during the end of last year, when the government decided to try and change the makeup of different government departments, they effectively cut the department related to the arts. They folded it into transport. It doesn't even exist as a title anymore. So, I mean, while some people say that, well, you've still got people working in the department, I think symbolically it says everything. And unfortunately, when it comes to the arts and it comes to the entertainment sphere and then the flow-on effects in terms of the rest of the economy and industries, whether that's the event space, whether that's tourism, hospitality, there is a total lack of prioritisation. One of the things that I was talking about this weekend, and I see a number of people have jumped on board and said this is a good idea, is at this moment we need to be rethinking about our priorities. And the government keeps talking about where they have to draw a line somewhere. That was, in relation to saying that if you had been employed as a casual for under 12 months, then, the line was going to be drawn for you. I'd be saying things like the massive expansion of the War Memorial $500 million plus another $50 million for, $500 million and plus another $50 million for the Captain Cook celebrations. Perhaps they're priorities that we don't need to be making right now, and that's a big chunk of money that could be going to help the arts and the entertainment space, and to be really preserving, looking after and nurturing Australia's cultural heritage. But when you have these conversations too, I think it was Tom's question, when you're having these conversations in Canberra, yes, there is a few eye rolling. And until you start having the nuts and bolts chat about how many people are employed in these industries, in these businesses, in people's electorates, when you start putting figures on these things, I know the Australia Institute's been crunching some numbers over the last week. The department themselves, the minister himself, refers to this as a $112 billion industry. Once you put all the kind of support industries in and the support services and component industries. So, that is a big chunk of money. It's also obviously really important to Australia's export industry, because the soft diplomacy that our arts and culture does beyond our borders is really, really important. It's not just in the music industry, it's not just in the screen industry, it's across the board. So the economic flow-on impacts are massive, but unfortunately, when you just talk about it in this one bucket of arts and feel-good stuff, that's when you get the eye rolls. Start talking about the hundreds of thousands of people out of work, billions of dollars going to be lost, and much harder for people to strike their export deals, and then politicians start to sit up and take notice.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm going to go to Quentin Dempster if you're on the line, and then after that we've got Patrick Donovan from Music Victoria. So first to you, Quentin.
Thanks, Ebony. Senator Hanson Young, you're seeing Paul Fletcher, the Minister, tomorrow. Have you any indication that he is designing a special rescue package for the arts industries, particularly after what we've heard from Evelyn and Bethlen? But and today he's announced a rescue package for the media, regional media, including a moratorium, as Richard has mentioned, a moratorium on local content. The only point I wanted to make is that if you get a briefing from the Screen Producers Association of Australia, they should be screaming at what Paul Fletcher has done with this moratorium for the rest of 2020. We would not have a commercial television production industry in this country without a regulated content quota on network licensees. And Richard made the point, I want to reiterate that, and I think the screen producers will also emphasise that, and that is that if we do anything, we should be extending the content quota to the video streamers, which are disrupting network television, commercial television licensees at the moment. So if you could get a briefing from screen producers before you go and talk to Paul Fletcher.
Thanks, Quentin. Yes, look, I'm not sure I'm going to be seeing him. I don't think, despite being the Minister for Communications, it's just going to be a phone chat, not a Zoom. I should suggest perhaps we do it over Zoom. But then, of course, he'd have to take some responsibility for the NBN as well. Look, I'm not sure. I don't think at this point they are in the process of or anywhere near finalising any kind of rescue package for the sector. I'll be pushing him on that. And, of course, a lot of the issues that have already been raised today by people. I do totally agree with you that the announcement today in relation to the reduction of requirements for broadcasters to invest in, create and support local content is going to be decimating to the screen industry, and it will have flow-on effects. People who work in the screen industry also work in live theatre. They also work in the music industry. It is part of the ecosystem as a whole. So you can't break these bits off from each other. So I think it is going to be a big blow. I'm going to push him tomorrow on the need to expand the requirements actually, and say those big companies like Netflix, Amazon, if they want to be part of the Australian community, they need to actually play a part, and that means helping to fund and promote Australian-made stories. We're consuming more content than ever before. I heard somebody joke the other day that they've, over the weekend they finished Netflix. That's how much content people are absorbing. There is a huge appetite for this, and I think if we were to be making sure leaders continue this conversation around the economic and social importance of Australian art and content, that's important. So we do need those big streaming companies to have requirements. They should play their part. But I also think it is time, Quinton, for a properly funded Australian content fund, and the government, as part of a rescue package, needs to put some money on the table because, as Matthew Diener said, investors are going to be turning the other way. We already know in other parts of the world they're starting to put in place much better rules and regulations around the amount of money, support and content that needs to be created for them. Canada's done a really good job at that. France leads the way, and the UK even more and more are doing that. I mean, if the BBC has to, be encouraged to spend more on local content in the UK, well, of course, Australian broadcasters and streaming services here should too.
Thanks, Sarah. I've got Patrick Donovan from Music Victoria next. Patrick, we are almost running out of time, but what would you like to say?
Thanks, Ebony, and thanks to the Australian Institute for your support for the arts. I have only just joined 15 minutes ago, so apologies if this is repeating another question, but just really we need to discern between the crisis requirements now, which have been outlined through the live performance proposal, but also the recovery phase is really important. For instance, the government had committed to rolling out a First Nations and live music 4-year programs from July 1. We don't necessarily want them tapping into that for emergency crisis relief because we still need those funds to support the development of those sectors through the recovery phase. So I think it's really important that we are lobbying for crisis relief at the moment, but not tapping into those development funds. And secondly, just want to leave with a bit of silver lining. The opportunity for Australian artists to have first crack at the venues and the festivals and the performance spaces when we do reopen is going to be really important, and also around regional touring. So any support we can get for regional touring when we do reopen, because it looks like international artists will have a lag in coming out to Australia, and there's going to be real opportunities there. But we need to be lobbying for the crisis support right now to keep artists and businesses alive. But we really need to be starting to think about the strategy for the recovery phase and the opportunities for Australian artists to get first crack at the audiences when that happens. And part of that will be campaigns around more support for Australian music, and that will include quotas around commercial radio and streaming.
Thanks, Patrick. Melanie, I wonder if I might ask you about that. You talked about Appleton Ladies Potato Race going down to Hobart. Was it also the type of thing that was going to go to other regional areas? And how important is regional arts?
Regional arts is vitally important. That particular production that was shut down recently was a production by an independent professional theatre company in Tasmania called Blue Cow Theatre. So that was giving Tasmanians work, very, very important in regional Australia, because artists, if we think about the artists that are working in the city, like the ones that I mentioned earlier, and all those jobs that are lost, they tend to work 100 times more than artists in the regions. It's so much more difficult for them to find paid professional work. My play, the Appleton Ladies Potato Race, had a separate tour happening next year down the east coast of Australia. We're not really sure whether that's going to happen. One of the things that I think concerns me, and I guess many of us that are in the live arts space, is the longer that this goes on, I'm not sure how long it's going to take for people to feel safe to come back and engage. anymore in the arts. And I guess that further to what Patrick was saying, that's probably something that needs to be considered when planning for the future. The longer this goes on, I suspect the more it's going to become a muscle memory to avoid sitting right next to somebody, to avoid being in a crowd at a gig and the like. And that's something we really need to consider too, which I think is the sort of scariest part of this. But it's really important, like Patrick was saying, that we do start making those plans for whenever they are.
Can I just add to that?
Yeah, go, Sarah.
If that's okay. Melanie, I think that's a really important aspect, and that's about building confidence into the recovery for the whole sector, but also us as a community. And, at times of crisis, it's been artists who have tended to be there at the forefront. During the bushfires, who was it that went out and organised the fundraisers straight off the back without even being asked? It was Australian musicians and Australian artists. Right now, artists sitting in their homes and uploading funny videos for us to all watch on Instagram and Twitter, and trying to keep enthusiasm and hope alive. Through recovery, it's going to need to be us giving confidence back to them as well, and in return to the rest of the community to say, we've been apart for this long, but actually we're going to all work together to make sure we can kind of come out of this bigger and brighter, not worse off. And I think engaging that confidence is going to be so important to the healing, not just of artists, but of the whole Australian community.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I think that's touched on another question in here from Erin Milne that was kind of just talking about, she's an independent producer in Melbourne, and a thread in the conversations with all her friends and colleagues at the moment is they feel like they've got very little capacity to survive this upheaval and little to no appetite to snap back at the end of it. So that idea of, I think, confidence is going to be an important one. But I did just want to finish on Catherine Lloyd's question, and I'll open this to all the panellists to wrap up. But Catherine's talks about, there's a conversation in the chat about the narrative that Australia has about the arts, and how do we collectively change the narrative for the arts and its value in our society. Richard, I'll start with you.
You're asking the economist to tell the story. Tell a story. Look, big picture confidence. The idea that real jobs in Australia involve coal mining and making cars is absurd. It's absurd, and anyone that works in the arts just can't take it seriously. You've got to talk confidently about yourself. I mean, Vivid in Sydney, the Light Festival contributed $172 million to the Sydney economy. Is that important? You bet it is. Is it wonderful? Yeah, it's actually wonderful in addition to the contribution it makes to the economy. So I really think that the industry needs to be a lot more confident in the way it talks about itself, and other industries aren't shy about saying, hey, we do a lot for you, you should do something for me. I mean, we've just spent $200 billion in the last month. 1% of that would be $2 billion. Does the arts and entertainment industry deserve 1% of it? Maybe it deserves 2%, which would be $4 billion just for this industry. Like, how much of the 200 do you think you deserve? And you've got to tell a story about why you're just as entitled to it as anyone else, or given all the data on how it hit entertainment first and will last the longest, I reckon you're entitled to more. But you've got to have a clear story, you've got to have a clear ask, and you've got to say it with some confidence. No one believes an actor that's insecure about their lines. Well, no one's going to believe an industry that is insecure about its place in our economy as well as in our society.
Mel, I'll go to you next.
Ebony, there are brighter minds than mine that can talk about the cultural significance in our history and the like about the arts, but I would encourage Australian artists artists to be talking to the people around them from a really basic point of view. We had, there was an actor on my feed suggested that for one day, if Australia shut down, Netflix shut down, Stan shut down everything that Australian artists had made, they'd really know about what it is that we contribute to our society. But I would argue that it even goes further than that. If you think about, say, the top rating TV shows, so MasterChef last night, Dancing with the Stars a couple of weeks ago, all of those shows, there are artists involved in. There are artists designing the costumes. There are artists training the dancers. If we look at football, for example, and sport, it's an artist who is designing the look of a team and the costumes, if you will, of the team. The arts is in every single moment of our life as Australians and as human beings all over the place. So I would encourage we artists to get that conversation going, to talk about how the arts is part of everything that we do constantly. Like even this pencil, an artist decided to make it pink. You know, like there's all sorts of ways everywhere in our life that the arts are involved, and I would really encourage artists and people to recognise this and look at this on a micro and a macro level.
Thanks, Melanie. And Sarah, finishing up with you.
Look, I think Richard and Melanie make excellent points. I think the confidence element is absolutely crucial, and I think the way we talk about the sector and the jobs and the elements and how broad spread it is essential as well. One of the things that I've been contemplating is the real need for something like a creativity commission. We have a productivity commission, we have a human rights commission, we have all of these other types of bodies that oversee things that are important, and creativity is essential. It cuts across all parts of the economy, all parts of our lives. And I think as part of changing the narrative, talking about how widespread, how influential, how important it is through some type of national advocacy body like a creativity commission would be a really, really good step forward. Because it's not just this crisis, it's what happens next. And if we don't get this industry off its knees and ready for recovery and, singing and dancing and doing what it does well at the end of this, I think there's going to be a huge cultural deficit, not just to local communities, but to Australia on the globe. So, yes, talk with confidence, tell those stories and understand how widespread creative Australia is.
Thank you, Sarah. We'll wrap it up there. Thank you to all our guests today, Senator Sarah Hanson Young, playwright Melanie Tait and Richard Dennis. And thank you everyone for your great questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them. Thanks also to the other industry representatives that we heard from: Matt Diener from Screen Producers Australia, Evelyn Richardson from Live Performance Australia, Bethwyn Sarau from the Australian Major Performing Arts Group, and Patrick Donovan from Music Victoria. Thank you for your contributions. I know the arts industry is hurting at the moment, so it's great to hear from everyone.
This has been a special episode of Follow the Money, and we're aiming to bring you shorter but more frequent episodes during the pandemic, so stay tuned. The Australian Institute's next webinar will be about the media industry with special guest Quentin Dempster on Wednesday the 22nd of April at 11 a.m. This episode was recorded on Wednesday the 15th of April 2020, and things may have changed since recording. You can visit tai.org.au for all our latest research and content, and we're on Twitter at the Oz Institute with an AUS. My Twitter handle is Ebony_Bennett with a double N double T. Sarah Hanson Young is at Sarah in the Senate, and Senate is spelled SEN with a numeral 8. Melanie Tait is at Melanie Tait with a TAIT. Richard Dennis is at RDNS_TAI. This episode was produced by Jennifer Macey. Our theme music is by Jonathan McFeat from Pulse and Thrum, and you can find more of his music at pulseandthrum.com. And today we'll leave you with this song by Wollongong singer-songwriter Kay Proudlove, which she posted on her Instagram page, Kay_Proudlove. She's performing from her living room on Facebook Live every Thursday night instead of her regular gigs, and you can find more of her music at kayproudlove.bandcamp.com. This episode was produced by Jennifer Macey with help from River McCrossen. Wash your hands regularly, stay at home if you can, and thanks for listening.
Social distancing is a fancy way of saying don't you share your germs around. So I'm self-isolated, and I'm talking to my cat again because no one else is here with me. COVID-19, oh, I swear that you've been teaching people about proper hygiene. 30 seconds soap and water, and then before I know it, I touch my stupid face again. COVID-19, it's a flu like plague. COVID-19, you took away all my income. Oh, look what you've done. Nobody likes you, so you should just go away.